Paul Wittgenstein had trained his entire life to be a pianist. And not just any pianist, one of the best. He was born into one of Vienna's wealthiest families, and music wasn't just a passion for Paul. It was his identity. He studied under the best teachers. He performed in grand concert halls. He had everything a young pianist could dream of. Then came World War I. Paul was drafted into the Austrian army and sent to the Russian front. And one day, in the chaos of battle, a single bullet changed everything. He woke up in a makeshift field hospital, and his right arm was gone. Now, for a concert pianist, this wasn't just an injury. It was an end. And everybody assumed that he would give up music. Everyone assumed his career and his life as he knew it was over. And for a moment, he believed it too. How do you play a piano when you have half of your ability missing? How do you move forward when everything you built your life on is taken away? But instead of mourning or even after mourning what he had lost, Wittgenstein did something unthinkable. He sat down at the piano with one hand and he started again. Wittgenstein refused to accept that his story was over. He retrained himself to play with his left hand alone. And here's the thing. There is no music written for a pianist with only one hand. So Wittgenstein commissioned new works from the greatest composers of his time. Maurice Ravel, Richard Strauss. They wrote entire concertos for one hand, pieces of music that had never existed before. And somehow, his music became even more powerful. Wittgenstein didn't get his right hand back, but he found something else. A new way forward, a new kind of beauty, a new way to make music that only he could create. Because grace doesn't always restore what was lost. Sometimes grace makes something new from what remains. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 12:9, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." That's not the answer we want. I want God to fix everything, to restore what's broken exactly as it was before, to erase the pain and the failure and the loss. But sometimes grace works differently. The Apostle Paul had his own wound, his thorn in the flesh, he called it. He begged God to take it away, and God didn't. Instead, God said, "My grace is sufficient for you," which is another way of saying, you don't need to be who you were before. I can still make something beautiful from what remains. Most of us are waiting for restoration, waiting for things to go back to normal, waiting for the pain to end, waiting for life to be what it used to be. But what if grace isn't about going backwards? What if grace is inviting us to begin again in a new way? Wittgenstein never got his right hand back, but he became something no one else ever had. A one-handed concert pianist with music written specifically for him. Paul never had his thorn removed, but his ministry changed the world and shapes who we are. Maybe grace isn't about getting everything back. Maybe grace is about moving forward differently. So where do you need to begin again? Take a few minutes today to ask yourself, where in my life am I waiting for things to go back to the way they were? Then ask, what if God's asking me to start again differently? Write down a few steps you can take, maybe even just one step that you can take to move forward in a new way. Not waiting, done with the mourning, but creating something new out of what remains. Because grace just doesn't restore, grace reinvents. And maybe, just maybe, what comes next will be even more beautiful.